The majority of our life is lived in liminal space.
And there's this in-between space, this liminal space.
This liminality that reveals possibility.
I think we're in a liminal moment, but also in a place of transformation. We could actually change as a people.
I have great affection for the church and a troubled relationship with it.
That can't be the gospel because God said to love our neighbors.
Just to be alive in time means that we're on the threshold of the future.
Just to begin questioning is so difficult because you have these voices in your ears telling you that you're not a real Christian.
We don't know what the future looks like. We have to work it out together.
All right, welcome to Liminal Living Podcast. Got another solo episode for you. Dr. Tom coming at you from my office this time. Last week I was at home. This week I'm in the office because it's cold, but the roads are clear and snowy. The snow stuff is kind of cleared away. Well, we are on the third week of Advent, and the first week was talking about hope and how it's not just toxic positivity, denial of what's going on. The second week was joy and how joy is not a mood that you get in, but something deeper. If you want to hear those, you can go back the last couple weeks. And this week, the third week, was like the candle of peace. It's the pink candle, and it's the candle that is for Mary. But the passage for this year's liturgical cycle is actually out of Matthew, I believe 11. Yes, 11, 2 through 11. And it's another John the Baptist. Because Advent is about preparation for the arrival of Christ into our lives. And John the Baptist, he fits this really well because he's the one that's setting the stage for Jesus to show up. In the early stages of Matthew, and last week we looked at how he was real, like that fiery preacher, but where that was directed at towards the people in power who were oppressing others. So this week, John the Baptist, he's actually in jail. The passage is... John the Baptist is in prison, and he's not really cool with that. And he called out Herod for taking his brother's wife, and he's like, that's not cool. Herod's wife didn't like that, and so she had him imprison John, even though he was popular and the people liked him. So he's a little bit nervous about doing it, but he did it anyways. So John's in prison, and he knows he's probably awaiting an execution of some kind. So he sends some messengers to Jesus, and the messengers they bring this message: are you the one who's to come, or should we wait for another? And so Jesus gives them a response. So that's kind of the context of this week's verse. Before we dive into what's going on in this passage and how it translates into peace and the whole Christmas season and all that, had an interesting thing happen this last week. And this really has something to do with peace, because I definitely didn't feel any peace at all. I had just a lot of crazy, stressful things happen last week. One of those crazy, stressful things was that we had a planned power outage. We got a text and an email and a letter in the mail from our electric company, and they let us know, we have a planned power outage Friday from 11 p.m. It should be 6 hours, so plan accordingly. And the temperatures just happened to be plummeting that day. I think the wind chills was below zero, single digits below zero, -4 or something like that. It's cold stuff, and it's snowing. And so this planned power outage, I put it in the calendar. I put it in my notifications. I reminded myself of it multiple times during the week, and I still forgot the day of. I should have got the generator out. I should have been planning in advance. I should have been doing all this stuff, but I forgot. And so we are concluding our day. We just decorated some stuff for Christmas, put up some more decorations. And so we plugged them in and we said, let's take a look at these, and we back up. And then the whole house goes black. We live in the country too, so there's no street lights outside. And when the power goes out, it's out and it's dark. And so the whole house is just pitch black. And as soon as it went out, I just went, oh, the planned outage. It's here. And I forgot. So grab my son and we go grab the generator. We have a whole hookup on the side of the house for the generator that can power a house in an outage. So we fill it up with gas and we pull it out of the garage and go to the side of the house. And it's cold. There's winds blowing. It's snowing. It's not really nice time to be outside. But we got to get the power back on. So we get it all set, and I grab the pull thing. I'm not an engine guy, so it's like the thing you yank on to spin the flywheel. That little cranker thing. I don't know what it's called. But I grab that, and I give it a tug, and that whole flywheel flies off the generator. Just the rivets gave out, and I'm just looking at it. I'm like, what do I even do? Like normally I just give it a tug and off we go. And it just flew right off. And I'm like, oh, crap. So I told my son, all right, you put that flywheel back over top of the thing and just push on it, and then I'll pull, and we're going to get this thing started. So that was fun and stressful. But I did find starter fluid. There was just one squirt left, and we squirted in there, and I gave a tug. We got one chug out of the engine, and then it shut off. So then we spent I think we were out there an hour and a half just tugging on that cord, trying to get it started, and it wouldn't go. I was stressed, and I was kind of flipping out in my mind, and I'm like, it's cold, and we got to... So I went in the house, and I'm like, okay, it's not going to get too cold in the house if we don't have heat for 6 hours. So we just kind of got bundled up and sent everyone to bed, and the next day, well, I stayed awake, and the power came back on at 3:30, so it was only out for 4 hours. And I made sure to get the pellet stove moving and turn off all the lights and all that kind of stuff, and then I fell asleep. Woke up the next day, didn't get enough sleep. You go to bed at like 4 and you wake up at 9 and you're groggy. And I remembered something, and I felt really stupid. Spending an hour and a half out in the cold and the snow, tugging on that pull start. And I forgot that when I turn off my generator, I cut the gasoline. There's a little knob, and you turn it, and it cuts off the gasoline flow from the tank to the engine, and then it just runs out. I forgot to open the gasoline back up. I felt so dumb. The next morning, I went and apologized to my son and my wife and everyone, and I'm just like, I feel so dumb right now. And I still haven't figured out if it starts because I don't want to go out there. But, oh my gosh, I felt so dumb. I did not feel at peace at all. And that was like Saturday. And the next day, on Sunday, I had to talk about peace to my congregation. I just got up and I'm like, I'll just tell y'all, I feel like a hypocrite talking about peace because I did not keep mine over the past weekend. But it still kind of fit because I talked about how peace wasn't just tranquility. Peace wasn't just calm. Peace wasn't just chill. Peace was something else. And so we looked at this passage of John the Baptist and everything. But then this week, I did experience something peaceful. And it was during some stressful times where I had some scheduled podcast recordings to happen this week, and I had to end up canceling them for a kind of a church, a little emergency that was happening at the church. So I had to cancel those. Plus we had the toy store happening. We take all these donations of toys, and then we open it up to the community, and they can come and shop for their kids for free, get free toys for Christmas. It's just a cool thing our church has been doing for like 10 years. And so we had that happening while the emergency, so I had to cancel some things. And so I spent the afternoon, instead of planning and writing and recording and doing all this stuff, I was sitting in our toy store that was in our little hall with one of my friends from church, a volunteer. Her name was Sherry. And we were just chatting about Christmas movies and our favorite Christmas movies and why they were our favorites, and she exchanging different ones, making lists of ones that we should watch that we haven't seen that they recommended. And we spent like 3 hours in the store just chatting. And, people would come in and we'd let them shop for the presents for their kids and then head on out. And I mean shop as in like just you get to choose which ones. You don't have to pay anything, but you choose which ones you want for your kids. So they did that, and that was the most chill thing that happened all week. And I definitely felt peace in that moment. And so what is peace if it isn't the existence of tranquility? I wanted to look at this stuff because peace is not something that everything has to be perfect in order to experience it. Like we think that peace is just the absence of chaos. Like if things are not chaotic, then peace must be established. And I think this is kind of backwards, because if we were to dive into this passage from Matthew 11, I think we can make some a little bit more sense of this peace understanding. Like John the Baptist, he's a prophet in the desert. He's speaking out against the institution of oppressive government and religion, which Walter Brueggemann says that's the prophetic task, is to dismantle the world in front of us and then imagine the world as though God is in charge. And what does that look like? The prophet is supposed to paint the picture of what that looks like. Well, John the Baptist was imprisoned by King Herod for doing that very thing. And his expectation of the Messiah is a little bit off in Matthew. He's thinking that the Messiah is going to bring the fire of God's wrath upon the powerful and the wicked and incinerate them all. That's his sermon in Matthew 3 that we looked at last week. He was wrong about that. We talked about that last week. Now he's in prison. And he's imagining his release by this Messiah, King Jesus, who just also happens to be his cousin. So he's got all these ends. He's like, hey, I'm the forerunner of the Messiah. He's my family cousin that I've known forever. He's waiting for this connection that he has with, God's anointed, for the vindication moment. I was right. I said the right thing, yet I'm in prison for it. I need vindication. So John sends these messengers to Jesus, basically saying, when am I getting out of jail? And Jesus answers kind of cryptically. He says, go and tell John what you hear and see. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, those with skin diseases are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the poor have the good news brought to them. And blessed is anyone who takes no offense at me. That's Jesus' answer to when am I getting out of prison. I didn't understand how that was it almost seems like Jesus is dodging the scenario altogether. He's not answering the question. John the Baptist and Jesus. When Jesus says these things, go tell John what you're seeing and hearing. The list of stuff that he's saying, like the blind see and the deaf hear and all this stuff. What he's done is he's created a mashup from Isaiah. Now remember, Matthew is written to the Hebrew audience, so there's a lot more Old Testament references in there because that's their roots. But Jesus quotes Isaiah 35 and 61, and he does this subversive remix of the text. So if you compare this mashup of Isaiah 35 and 61 with Jesus' answer, there's a lot of similarities here, but there's also one thing noted that he doesn't. So blind receiving their sight. This is right out of Isaiah. The eyes of the blind shall be opened. And what's interesting is this passage in Isaiah opens up with, here is your God, he will come and save you. That's what John the Baptist is asking Jesus to do. Come get me out of prison. I want to be saved. And he says, well, tell John what you see. The blind are receiving their sight. Okay, check. That's in Isaiah 35. The ears of the deaf shall be opened. The lame shall leap like deer. This is right out of Isaiah. And the tongue of the speechless will sing for joy. That's the Isaiah 35 passage there. So we got blind receiving sight, check. Deaf hearing, check. Lame walking, check. And then he adds Isaiah 61, that he has sent me to bring good news to the oppressed, to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives and release those who are prisoners. Okay, good news to the poor and oppressed, check. Liberty to captives and prisoners released. Wait a second. No, he didn't say that one. He left that out and instead inserted the dead are raised. So this is really interesting. He's quoting Isaiah 35 and 61. He does a mashup, but he takes out letting prisoners out of prison and puts in, I will raise the dead. Now this is really interesting. What's going on here? And then he says, blessed are you if you're not offended by this. So he basically told John, no, you're not getting out of prison. You're probably going to die there, but I will raise you after that there is a resurrection on the other side. Now, this sounds very religious, like, ooh, that's very religious overtones of resurrection and life after death and hope and all this. But you have to tie this into the world that they're speaking in. The world that they're speaking inside of is very different. They're not the binary system of heaven and hell, those going to heaven and those going to hell. They don't have that binary system in place. They have a different binary system of there's Jews and then everybody else. That's the people in Matthew's gospel hear that. They have a different binary system. So replacing letting prisoners free with raising people from the dead is actually greater vindication and an act of God disarming the powers. This is something that's interesting. John is speaking out against the powers. The powers put him in prison for speaking out against them. And Jesus then says, I'm actually going to disarm the powers of the one tool they have to threaten you with, and that's to take your life. And so he says, I'm not going to let you out of prison because that would require me leading an army against Herod and against Rome, and that's the one thing I'm not going to do. Instead, I am going to I'm going to submit myself to the crucifixion and the injustice of that, and there's this whole... So there's something about liberation that Jesus is speaking on, not just theological truths about afterlife stuff, but there's liberation speak happening. And I love what Oscar Romero says. He says that peace is not the silent result of violent repression. Peace is the generous, tranquil contribution of all to the good of all. As that peace is not the silent result of violent repression. That's what the people are experiencing, of violent repression. And you can kind of see this. We think, just imagine something that you might encounter in your daily life. You walk into a room and there's a whole bunch of kids and they're all, being all crazy and energetic. And then, an adult figure walks in the room and then they scream at the kids, you better settle down and sit down and be quiet or else I'm going to blah, blah, blah. And then all the kids sit down and they're quiet and they're, oh my gosh, don't talk or they're going to, flip out on us. But we kind of say, oh, okay, now I can have some peace and quiet. That's actually not peace. It might be quiet, but it's not peace. That's violent repression. It might not be the, violence that is like a warlike thing, but it is an exercise of dominating authority in order to get a result. And I'm not speaking like we're not allowed to do that or not supposed to do that kind of stuff, but it's a repression. And we think that peace is never in service to any kind of oppression or repression. So the establishment of peace is not the establishment of like a conformity that says, if you don't, I'm going to do this. And then everyone's like, oh, we better. That's not peace. Like a lot of governments try to establish peace that way through, oppression and violence and domination and all that. A lot of wars are fought over that kind of stuff. And so peace is different than just an absence of conflict or the presence of everyone bending to your will to give you the peace and quiet you want. I think that peace is something that is something that's grounded in the reality of your everyday life. Like you can find it if you just slow down in the moment. And that's what I experienced. I didn't experience much peace when I was out trying to start the generator. But that was my own violent oppression of my expectations that I have to get this running or else I won't be able to, have a functioning house inside with heat and all this other stuff. But it ended up fine. Like it was only out for 4 hours and the house never got below 62 or something like that. So I was like, okay. But I was violently oppressing my own self with my own expectations, and I'm not going to experience peace that way. Peace doesn't happen that way. But then I gave myself permission to change my entire schedule for the day and sit down with, volunteer at a Christmas toy store. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, I got in touch with what actually is in the moment. And maybe you've experienced this, like you're a little stressed out and you're like, I need to go for a walk. I just need to get out, get some air, get some fresh air. Like, right? You're trying to reset the nervous system. And peace isn't tied to the nervous system, but a calmed nervous system can experience the peace that is. I think that's what I'm trying to say. Like it already exists in the places that we are, but we don't have access to it because we're violently oppressing or repressing ourselves, or we're experiencing a violent oppression from the outside. But it exists at the foundational level of reality. And John the Baptist, he's not experiencing it because he's tied his peace to so many expectations outside of himself. And he's like, I will experience peace when all of these requirements are met. When I get out of prison and the Messiah comes and destroys King Herod and establishes himself as the king, and then the wicked are incinerated, and then it's like we do this to ourselves too. Like peace dethrones the need for control. Peace happens when the human ecosystems, economic, mental, psychological, religious, political, emotional, etc., are in balance and harmony. Like peace is felt when those systems are good. And there's no invasive species dominating it. Like if you look at what cancer is, like cancer happens when certain cells in the body believe themselves to be more important than all the others, and they hijack the resources for themselves. And then they grow so large and toxic that it kills the ecosystem it lives within. That's a good picture of like how power works, power structures. Political and religious and all that. It's like, I deserve more than someone else because I'm more important or more worthy or more whatever. So I'm going to take more resources for myself. Now, peace isn't looking at people like John the Baptist who are in prison and saying, hey, don't rock the boat, right? Cancer cells are supposed to get all the resources. Just let them be, right? That's not peace. It's going to destroy everything. Peace can actually be a prophetic disruption of an unjust system. That's what John the Baptist has been doing. He's like rocking the boat and saying this isn't okay. Jesus does, praise him in this passage for that. But I think that there's this. We don't understand the concept of violence because we think that it's tied to weapons or whatever. But violence is so much more than just hurting another with a weapon or your bare hands or whatever. It's more. Now there's a pattern that I've seen in the Bible. Violence begins with inner fragmentation of the human person. On the inside, we're fragmented, we're not integrated, we don't know what to deal with it. The Bible calls it sin. We make it sound more religious than it is. But really what we're talking about is that fragmentation of our inner person. We don't have an integrated inside and outside world. But instead of integrating ourselves into a unified person of peace, we attempt to seize by force what we can only receive through trust. So we organize ourselves around power structures that promise the perception of peace, and we pledge our loyalty towards it and then against whoever it declares as the enemy. And so this is what is, the Bible starts right off the bat and says that human sin exists. And I think that's the inner fragmentation of who we are, not just, different missteps morally or whatever. Doing this act is a sin. It's deeper than that. It's the actual spiritual, psychological, emotional fragmentation of us on the inside. And so instead of integrating ourselves into that unified whole person of peace, then we just grab by force. what we want, and then organize ourselves around power structures that promise to give us more of that. And then we have to become loyal to those power structures. And then whoever is against that power structure, those become our enemies. And if you look at how politics is played out in this country right now, like that's how it works. And guess what? That's how it's always worked. It's just amped up to 11 right now. But what happens is God's justice starts to break in and disrupt the false peace that's disguised as passive conformity. As prophets speak up and then they mobilize the marginalized, and every new act of God meets systemic resistance as the empire presses back with coercion and domination. Classically, this comes in threats of death and imprisonment. Like, you better, get on board. That was John the Baptist. Like, stop, calling me out for stealing my brother's wife. And John the Baptist is like, I will do no such thing. So he ends up in prison and then ends up getting beheaded later. Right? Now, some of the human heart can react in fear and then fall back in line. And then some of the human heart is always going to be resistant to slavery and demands liberation, or salvation is a word. But liberation is a better word, I think, for salvation in the Bible. But it refuses to settle for anything but peace. And so this is that next layer. The inner fragmentation, we organize ourselves around systems of power, and then all of a sudden that becomes oppressive, and then God's justice breaks in, when like Bob Dylan writes a song and mobilizes the marginalized, and like hippie movements happen, which they had the diagnosis correct. I don't know if they had the answers, but they had the diagnosis correct. And so then this new act of God starts mobilizing, and then the empire presses back, and like this is the story of humanity over and over again. Now, the Christian theology of resurrection, when Jesus says the dead are raised, like, it's not just hope of an eternal life after you die. This is a liberating force from the empire systems of death and domination, because Jesus is disarming death, the ultimate tool of domination, from those oppressive forces that we've organized ourselves around. And it frees the human heart so it can stand against oppression, knowing that the power of the systemic thing is fake. It cannot do anything to the soul. And so, yes, it can imprison John, and yes, it can destroy John and his physical life, but Jesus promises resurrection on the other side. And this is why the martyrs of early Christianity were like, they were okay with being martyred in the Colosseums and whatnot, because they knew that death had lost its power, and they would stand up to the oppressive Roman governmental forces and gladly give their lives to it, because they're like, what is death? It's just the breakdown of this physical body, but I will continue on afterwards. And the forces of death always resist liberation, but the kingdom is always breaking in and disrupting oppressive power. And where the gospel threatens the systems of injustice, the unjust will respond with repression. And that's the way of all the martyrs. It's the way of John the Baptist. And the violence spoken of is both like this internal and external, because we have that inner fragmentation that's still eating away at us. But then we have this, there's the external oppressive forces, then we have our own internal critic. And there's this conflict inside of us between fear and love and ego and surrender and domination and compassion and all that stuff. And there's this battle that happens inside of us. And I think that the world is not saved through force, but by a change of consciousness altogether. Like, Jesus brings peace by bringing healing from the inside out. And both are essential, like inner healing of our greed and desire for domination and control, but also outer healings of the systems those in power built with their greed and domination. So that's what I think. Peace is not just the establishment of tranquility, but it's a force that we can tap into in the present moment that can stand up to oppressive forces that are trying to bring chaos into our lives. So I guess a reflection question you want to think about is, where has your expectation of what God ought to do caused blindness for what God is actually doing in your life? Let's think about that for a little bit. Because expectation, John had a lot of expectation of what the Messiah was going to do, and it was not met. Jesus did not meet those expectations, but Jesus was doing the kingdom work. but his expectation made him blind to what was actually happening. So it's right there in the narrative. And something you want to do to try and tap into the peace that exists in every moment, regardless of circumstances. To tap into that peace, there's something called breath prayer, or it's a breath meditation, and I learned how to do this a while ago. But you close your eyes and you inhale for 4 counts. You just breathe in, fill your lungs entirely, and then you count to 4 as you hold it there. And then you exhale for 6 counts. So you take 4 counts to inhale and fill your lungs entirely. You don't just suck it all in at once, but you count to 4 as you inhale, and then you hold your breath for 4 counts, and then you exhale for 6 counts. Because believe it or not, you have a nervous system, and this is actually how you can calm the nervous system down for a minute. And in the midst of chaos, you can tap into the peace that exists in the moment by just kind of calming some things down inside of you. So I think that's a little bit what peace is. Thanks for listening to me ramble for a while. I'm a little tired and flustered from my busy week, but those are some thoughts I have on peace. I hope they're helpful. Next week we'll look at love, and then we're going to run some reruns to get to the end of the year. Some of my favorite episodes from this past year. I think you'll enjoy them, but I'm going to do some regrouping on the other side of this. So I'll catch you next week, and we'll post something cool. See you then.